Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, February 8th, and it is day 125 since October 7th. Thank you to those who were able to join us live for our regular Thursday briefing. I wanted to share a little bit that I shared in that briefing this morning. I talked a little bit about some of the observations I had from the executive leaders trip that I led a few weeks ago. One of the things I talked about is the reality on the ground that we observed in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, but in the broader Middle East in general, the Near East. We were in Jordan and Lebanon as well. It's just that the reality is so much worse than it's being reported. And it's really hard to describe. Last week, the New York Times reported for many Palestinians in the West Bank, life is subject to even more restrictions like checkpoints. And just having been there and spent a few days driving in the West Bank, I felt like reading that it is such an understatement. And if I could show you a picture, I would, of how almost all of the villages in the West Bank, at least the entry point from the front, is shut down, either closed by actually a gate being closed or closed by being having boulders or dirt bulldozing it. I could tell you stories about how so many people in Israel, Jewish people, Palestinian people, are just hurting, grieving. I think the kind of temperature or the way that it feels, it's just difficult to describe, but there's this visceral, palpable trauma, this collective trauma that when you read about it in the news or I've been working daily on what's been happening since the attacks by Hamas. And it's hard to describe without being there how bad it is. The other thing is that, we've been talking a lot about how the United States wants to prevent this from becoming and escalating into a broader Middle East war. And you've probably heard me say this point before, but even before the attacks on the US base in Jordan, and even before the US attacks in Syria and Iraq, and I have an update on that, we just attacked Baghdad last night. Now it was a targeted attack, but even still, even before all of that, this was already a broader Middle East war. We've been having meetings with some ambassadors here in Washington, D.C. of countries in the Near East. And even countries that have peace agreements with Israel are saying that those are shaky and that the regional stability of the peace that currently exists in the Middle East is under threat. And so we heard from a pastor, in South Lebanon who pastors a community there, that his whole entire community had to be displaced. And we know that there are tens of thousands of people in South Lebanon and in North Israel who've been displaced. That, the Lebanese, the Jordanians, that people in Iraq, Syria has been, in a civil war for many, many years. But that the idea that this was just a war between Israel and Hamas and Gaza was paying the consequences, that's not the case. This is already a broader Middle East war. And finally, I just wanted to say that we met with Christians in Israel and in Jerusalem and in the occupied Palestinian territories and in Bethlehem and Ramallah, throughout the West Bank, in Amman, in Beirut. And we heard consistently from, not only Christians, but Muslims too, that people just want to live in peace. I shared a few, I don't know if it was this week or last week, but about how there were people chanting in Gaza, and they were chanting against Hamas, and they were chanting against Israel, just calling for an end to the war. That people want to be able to stay, and they want to be able to have a future for their children. And so that kind of desperation to be able to have a future and not have war and to end these cycles of violence, I think is an overwhelming goal. So in terms of what's happened in the last 24 hours, the US did have a military attack on Baghdad. This was the first attack specifically on the capital of Iraq. They killed a leader of the group who claimed responsibility for the drone attack that killed the 3 American troops on the American base in Jordan. The name of the group is Kataib Hezbollah. Now, Kataib Hezbollah is an Iraqi group. It's different than the Hezbollah in Iran. I think they're related but different. Hezbollah means party of God in Arabic. I'm not an expert by any means, but according to my limited research, Kataib Hezbollah is an Iraqi-based group that is pro-Iranian. It's a pro-Iranian militia group, and they did claim responsibility for the attack on the Jordanian base. And the US Special Operations carried out a drone strike in Baghdad that killed one of their leaders, who was blamed for the attacks on the US personnel in the Middle East. It was a targeted attack, according to one official, and a second official said that the US reserves the right to strike any other Shia militia leaders and commanders. We know that the US has also, been with the UK and others responding to the Houthis in Yemen. So there's been a lot of activities in that regard. The big news, of course, yesterday, this deserves repeating. Blinken has been in the Middle East. This is his 5th trip since October 7th. He has been meeting with officials in Saudi, Egypt, Qatar. He met with President Abbas. Yesterday, he met with Netanyahu, and right after that meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a speech and said that he was rejecting Hamas's counter-proposal, which was the counter-proposal to the Paris peace proposal. Hamas's proposal was a 135-day peace or truce that would have ended with a complete Israeli withdrawal. So it would have lasted about 4.5 months. All the hostages would have ended up going free incrementally in exchange for prisoners. The end result would have been a full end to the war. And a source close to the negotiations said, it wouldn't have guaranteed a permanent ceasefire at the outset, but it would have meant that before all of the hostages were free, there would have been a guaranteed end to the war. But Netanyahu rejected the ceasefire proposal and vowed to fight until total victory. Netanyahu said that Israel is the only power capable of guaranteeing security in the long term. And he said the day after, referring to what happens after the war against Hamas is over, he said the day after is the day after Hamas, all of Hamas. So he's talking about a total decisive victory, which is quite significant because almost all analysts have said it's impossible to defeat Hamas because Hamas is more of an ideology than just a group. Like you could defeat the military wing, but not the military wing and the political wing. And so he emphasized there's no solution other than a complete and decisive victory. And that means a decisive victory over Hamas. So that is the most significant news. The death toll as of the most recent numbers coming from the health ministry in Gaza are that 27,708 people have been killed and 67,147 people have been injured. There continues to be significant attention paid to UNRWA funding and a call for states and funders to reinstate funding for UNRWA. UNRWA has declared that they could be out of funding as early as the end of February. So that's the most significant news that's happened in the last 24 hours. I'd encourage you, if you have not, signed up for CMEP's newsletters, or if you're not familiar with our Lenten campaigns and engagement, we will be partnering with Christians for ceasefire and doing activities in Washington, D.C. specifically, but also Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages. So sign up for our newsletters to be sure that you're kept in the loop about all of those activities and opportunities to pray and stand in solidarity with Israelis and Palestinians who are committed to calling for a ceasefire and advocating for peace.